they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and saith unto them, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all, and servant of all. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him up in his arms, he said unto them, whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me. And whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me. And then moving to Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 35. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come unto him, saying, Master, we would that thou shouldest do for us whatsoever we shall desire. And he said unto them, what would ye that I should do for you? And they said unto him, grant unto us that we may sit, one on thy right hand and the other on thy left in thy glory. Wow. And then we're going to drop down to verse 41. But when the 10 heard it, they began to be much displeased with James and John. And Jesus called them to him and saith unto them, ye know that they which are accounted to rule over the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority upon them. But so shall it not be among you. But whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister. And whosoever will be chiefest shall be servant to all. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. When we read that verse, particularly the one in chapter 9, it almost seems a non sequitur, because they're talking about who's going to be great, and Jesus calls this child to him and says, and he's making an object lesson, and when you read it, it doesn't seem like it follows until you begin to think about what he is trying to convey to them. Okay, historians argue endlessly about which U.S. president should be considered the greatest. 4 have been immortalized in a fashion none of the others can claim. The sculptor Berglund blasted the likenesses of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt into the granite face of Mount Rushmore. Most of us will never see our likenesses carved in the side of a mountain, but most of us would like to think our influence and legacy will live on even after we leave this world, that we will not be forgotten. Jesus addressed this basic human desire when he told his disciples, whoever desires to be great among you shall be your servant. Wow. We don't think that way. That's not our natural inclination that, oh, if I want to be great, let me be the servant. Nope. We think of it the other way. We think of it as the servant is the lowest. It's not what Jesus said. Jesus explained the road to greatness does not run along the path of self-promotion or the exercise of unfettered authority. Greatness is not about commissioning a sculpture in your honor or gaining 1 million followers on social media. True greatness comes when one person humbly serves another, even when no one else notices. What does popular culture teach us about greatness? And do those lessons confirm or conflict with the teaching of Jesus? What does popular culture teach us about greatness? And do those lessons confirm or conflict with the teachings of Jesus? Our popular culture goes exactly counter to the teaching of Jesus. You know, it is the self-promotion, the look how great I am, look at me, look at what I've accomplished, look at what I've done. It's all about my abilities and my talents and my whatever. Not at all what Jesus taught. As I was studying this lesson, I thought about a man that I had read about. I actually just read about him this week. Anybody here know the name Nicholas Winton? Does that mean anything to anybody? Nicholas Winton. No? He's somebody we should probably remember. He's actually a great person. You won't hear about him likely in your history book, but perhaps you should. See, Nicholas Winton lived in England and had just started his career. He had just finished schooling and had started his career as World War II was beginning to unfold in Europe. Most people read the morning paper, shook their head in disgust at the things that were going on in Europe, and flipped over to the next page. But Nicholas Winton decided, there might be something I can do to help. And so he was scheduled to go on a skiing holiday to Switzerland. But he decided instead, I am going to go to Prague to see if there is some way, because at that point, the Nazis had locked down Prague, and the Jewish people that were there were unable to escape. And so he went there and began to see, is there a way I can at least get some of the children out? And the law back in England was that for him to do so, to bring a child out, he had to have someone that was willing to care for the child, so take them in, and then also a second person as a guarantor that if something happened to the first one, there was somebody else in line to take care of them, that they wouldn't become dependent upon the government. And so Nicholas Winton actually contacted his employer after he had been there for a week and said, I'd like to extend my stay for a little longer. And they agreed to let him stay. And he actually ended up staying in Prague for a month, organizing this effort to bring Jewish children out of occupied Prague back to England. And so he managed to set it up that the first group was able to come back with him. And over the next year, just over a year, he managed to bring 8 different groups of children out of Prague, saving them from the Nazi occupation, 669 of them. He actually had another group scheduled to come out on September 1st of 1939, a group of 250 of them. And that was the day that the Nazis invaded Poland and the border was shut, and he was unable to bring any of them out. Out of that 250, only 2 of them survived World War II. But the amazing part is Nicholas Winton didn't tell anybody about what he was doing. He wasn't, look at me, look at what I've done, how great I am. He told no one about his efforts. It was not until he was approaching his 80th birthday and his wife decided, I should clean out some of the junk that we have around our house and get rid of it. And she is digging around in the attic and throwing things away, and she finds these notebooks. And she says, what on earth are these? And she begins to read through these notebooks, and she begins to realize some of what they are. And so she decided that this was worth promoting, and so she contacted the BBC and told them what her husband had done some 50 years earlier, 60 years earlier. And so they decided they had this meeting, and he was there, and his wife told him they were going to this thing and really didn't tell him what it was about. Certainly didn't tell him that it was to recognize what his contribution is to honor him. So he is just sitting in the audience like everyone else. And there's a group of about 500 people there. And so they began to tell the story of Nicholas Winton and the effort he had made to rescue all these children from the Nazis. And they said, does there happen to be anybody in the audience? Knowing there was, because they had specifically invited them. And so in that audience was about 300 people that he had personally rescued through his efforts. And they were alive because of the efforts of Nicholas Winton. And actually, for Nicholas Winton's 100th birthday, they asked him what he would like to do. And he said, I would like to go up in an airplane and fly over the city. And so they said, we can arrange that. And they arranged it. And you know who the pilot was? One of the children, the grandchild of one of the children he had saved was the pilot that took him up for his 100th birthday and flew him around the city. You know, this man didn't do it to say, look at how great I am, pat me on the back, I'm a great person, but instead he made an effort to change the world for people that he could do for no recognition whatsoever. Imagine the disciples' humiliation when Jesus asked them what they were arguing about. The disciples had good reason to be embarrassed. They had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest in Mark 9:34. Probably they blushed as they shared this with Jesus, realizing just how silly their argument must have sounded to the Lord. Sometimes the best way for us to gain perspective on a disagreement is to take it to the Lord and confess it to him in prayer. Concern about social standing is an inborn human trait. We want to be known for making the best grades, for being the most athletic, being the most attractive. Even in adulthood, we can't seem to shake this obsession. We want to drive the nicest car. We want to have the best house. We want to make the most money. We are willing to exhaust ourselves to attain the status symbols. It has been widely observed that we will spend money we do not have to impress people we don't even like. What talents or possessions have you envied in others? And why do you think you have wanted those particular gifts or blessings? Anybody? Okay, a vacation home. Anybody else? What talents or possessions have you wanted? Sometimes, you know, we can pick all kinds of things. You know, there are people that, you know, they say, oh, I'd love to have a boat. My wife used to work with somebody, and they would say, you don't need a boat, you just need a friend with a boat. Anybody else? What talent or possession have you envied in others, and why do you think you've wanted those particular things? Nothing? I'm sure there's a whole list of things that we've wanted for whatever reason. You know, we often pick out, oh, I'd love to have that if I just had that. And there are things that, you know, there's some things I think of I'd love to be able to do. I'd love to be able to have the time to have my yard look the way I'd like it to look. You know, with the bushes trimmed just the right way and the trees planted just so and flowers all over the place. But I look at my schedule and I'm like, it's not going to happen. My mom's favorite flower was tulips. And so, I guess a year ago, I bought some tulip bulbs. I'm like, I'm going to plant a bunch of tulips in my yard. Well, I finally planted them last spring. I only had them for about 6 months at that point, and they had already started sprouting in the bag. They had sprouts about that long when I planted them. So I am hoping this year they will come up. I don't know if they'll survive the mistreatment that I gave them or not. You know, it's one of the things I wanted, but I just don't have time for it. I've told you before, my grandmother had a flower garden. And people would ask, where do your grandparents live? And I'd tell them, and I'd say, the house with the flowers. And everybody knew exactly who you were talking about because she had a flower garden that was about the size of this room. And it was, just a profusion of every color of flower imaginable. She put so much effort into it that the things closest to the road would be shorter, and everything it got taller as they went back. And colors coordinated, and it was just, wow. And that was her one thing was every Sunday morning when her flowers were in bloom, every Sunday morning she would come in. She had this big vase that was like this big, and it would just be overflowing. And that was her thing that she did every Sunday morning. She came to church and brought these fresh cut flowers out of her garden to church every single week. They were just astonishing. So everybody knew, you could say the house with all the flowers. Oh, yes, because you could not miss it. So it's something I'd like to do. I'd like to be able to do that, but I just don't have the time. We have to pick what we're going to have, what we have time for. And that, unfortunately, isn't one I have time for. Even people of faith are not immune to this sort of social posturing. We can debate among ourselves who's the most gifted preacher or singer or musician. We work hard so that our church or ministry will be highly regarded by our peers. The disciples may have been a little surprised when Jesus did not immediately launch into a full-fledged rebuke. Instead, he used this moment to teach a lesson that still applies today. Jesus began by saying, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last and servant of all. To illustrate this point, Jesus took a child in his arms and said to his disciples, whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me. When Victoria was in first grade, her best friend was this little Chinese boy. And she said one of the most profound things I think I've ever heard. She came home talking about her friend, and she said, he talks Chinese, but he laughs just like us. And it's so true. We may be so different in many ways, but we're so alike. Jesus was trying to convey to them, we can try to promote ourselves, but in the kingdom of God, that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for us to promote him. And so he pointed out that to be servant, we receive as a little child. Kids don't, when they're very small, now they unfortunately learn it from the adults to be different, but when they're very small, they don't care what language they speak. They don't care whether you're dressed in the best clothes or the worst clothes. Doesn't matter. They don't care if they're black or white or if you have purple polka dots, as long as you have a smile and are willing to play with them. That's all they're concerned about. There's no distinction. And Jesus was trying to convey that very thing to us, that we don't come, with our adult mentality and try to separate people into groups. We are guilty sometimes that we look at, this person would be interested in God. That person, they wouldn't be interested. And so why bother sharing the word with them? But I'll share it with this person over here. Jesus didn't make that distinction. He didn't pick and choose as to who would be willing. Brother Will mentioned last week, some of you, I'm sure many of you have heard about the revival going on at this university in Kentucky. And I just heard this morning, yesterday, they had set up 4 different chapels for people to meet, and all of them were completely packed, and they still had 8,000 people outside unable to get in. What it says to us is there are hungry hearts. There are people seeking and searching for God. Certainly, Certainly, we know there are spectators there. There are people there that aren't interested in what's happening. But let me tell you, you hang around the Spirit of God, and it has a way of getting on you. It has a way of attracting you. As I was reading about this and thinking about this, I remembered growing up, we had an elderly lady in our church, Sister Peachy. Sister Peachy grew up in the roughest of circumstances, and she had no formal education at all. But Sister Peachy had a love for God and a dedication to God that was so admirable. But you know what? When Sister Peachy first started coming to church, she didn't come because she was hungry for God. She came to see the show. She said those people were crazy acting. They went to church. They jumped up and down. She said this one over here was laughing, and that one right beside him was tears rolling down their face. And she said, I heard. She said, I didn't know what to think. She said, I heard that if you let that preacher look you in the eyes, he would hypnotize you. That's the way she said it. And she said, so every time the preacher got near me and he'd look at me, I'd look away because I didn't want him to hypnotize me. But she kept coming back to church. And the Spirit of God began to move upon her heart. And what a transformation took place down on the inside. We live in a world that is desperately seeking for something that is real. Help us, Lord, that we share you with them, something real, the transformation that you can make in heart and life, the change that you can bring about that transforms us from what we were to the servant of God. Children do not usually worry about most things that adults obsess over. They won't notice if our clothes reflect the latest fashion, but they will notice whether we show them genuine love and concern. They have an uncanny ability to spot a phony. They can tell who really cares and who does not, and they respond accordingly. Children usually cannot repay the love we show them either. But Jesus assured us that if we humbly receive the weakest and lowliest in his name, we are receiving him. And he promised that we have a heavenly reward by our Father who rewards openly. According to Jesus, the true greatness is showing kindness to others in a spirit of humility. He said, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last and servant of all. Greatness is volunteering to teach in the Sunday school class that no one else wants to teach. It's changing the dirty diapers and wiping runny noses in the nursery without complaining. It's blisters and calluses after an all-church work day. It's showing up at prayer meeting after a long day at work when you really just want to go home. It's driving out of your way to pick up somebody to bring them to church. Greatness is having a servant's heart. Noted pastor Erwin Lutzer is quoted as saying, how do you know you have a servant's heart? Look at your reaction when you're being treated like a servant. None of us appreciate being treated inferior to anyone else. Yet Jesus said, if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. In John 15:18. Jesus' contemporaries did not recognize his greatness until after they had crucified him. Like our master, we are more likely to carry a cross than to wear a medal. How do you feel when others treat you like a servant? How do you feel when others treat you like a servant? Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Mm-hmm. It's very hard not to, allow our frustration to come out when we, and I'll tell you, years ago, my wife and I were youth leaders. And we had planned and worked and had a youth activity on Friday night, Saturday, it was Saturday night actually. Saturday night. And we had one person show up. One person. And the very next day, we had parents come to us and say, why don't we ever have anything for the youth? When are we going to plan something? I about bit a hole through my tongue to keep from saying what I really wanted to say. Like, I put all this effort into it, planned something, bought all the material, bought all the snacks and stuff for them, and you don't bother to show up, you don't bother to call to say you're not coming, nothing. Okay. So, when things like that happen, it can be very difficult for us not to express our frustration and not to say what we really want to say to them. Lord, help me, to be the servant. But that is not easy. We don't like it a little bit. It's easy to say. Most of us could say, I've been crucified with Christ, can't we? It'll roll off our tongue. It'll come right out. But, you know what? If you're truly crucified, that means you're dead. And if you're dead, you don't respond. But I find out I'm not so dead when things like that happen, because I feel my blood pressure rise and my temper go up, and my Irish temper, and I really want to say what I want to say, and okay, help me not to. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. 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 And it's easy to say, I'm submitted to Brother Will. He's my friend, my brother, until he does me wrong, or I perceive that he's done me wrong. And suddenly I'm not nearly as forgiving as I want the Lord to be forgiving to me. It's just our human nature takes over. Lord, help me, because I'm still working toward it. But I want to have an attitude, and I'm justified in being angry with him. I'm justified in being greatly offended at him. And that's not what Jesus displayed. That's not the attitude he showed. And so I find out that I'm not nearly as crucified as I'd like to say I am. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. The part that we struggle with, Jesus didn't respond in hatred, in anger when he was mistreated. But I can tell you, I want to. When I'm mistreated, I want to respond in anger. I want to justify myself why I'm right in not talking to you ever again, not ever associating with you again, not ever having anything to do with you again because of what you've done to me. But that wasn't Jesus. He still gave his life and still loved them. He wept over Jerusalem knowing they were going, just days after that, they were going to crucify him. He said he would gather them together as a hen would gather her chicks together. I've watched that. I've watched a hen gather her chicks and protect them, against an attacker, a dog that was much, much, much bigger than her. But those were her babies, and she was going to defend them. And Jesus said he would have gathered Israel together. He would have defended them and protected them and provided for them. But they refused, and he wept over them. He didn't respond in anger. He responded in love because he had compassion, and he cared about people, even when they didn't deserve his compassion. Help me, Lord, because I can tell you, that's a struggle. That is a struggle to respond in love to people when they aren't loving. When they treat us bad, we want to treat them bad in return. Sometimes we want to treat them bad in case they treat us bad later. And that's not the way Jesus did things. Go ahead. And Jesus said that, if they hate you, they hated me first. And sometimes it is the very Spirit of God living on the inside of you that just grates people the wrong way, because it points out to them that they don't have to live the way they're living. And it reminds them of where they should be and what they should be doing. And so they respond in anger to you because you are the representative of Jesus Christ to them. They see that God is living inside of you, that you respond in a different way than they do, and it irritates them because they want you to be like they are. They want to pull you down into the mud like where they are, the muck, instead of saying, let me help you up. Let me lift you up. Instead, they want to pull you down. And so that spirit that is inside of them, frankly, they have no interest in serving God. They're happy where they are. It takes the Spirit of God bringing about a transformation. The Scripture talks about, the sow that was washed returns to wallowing in the mud. Why? Because there's still the heart of a pig there. You can wash the pig all you want. You can make it just as pretty as it can be. It'll be spotless clean. But give it a chance, it's going to go right back to the mud because there hasn't been any change on the inside. The heart hasn't changed. And sometimes we try to do that spiritually. We try to clean up. Oh, let me present a good image to everybody around me. But what's on the inside hasn't changed. And so I find myself drawn back to where I was before because there's a problem on the inside. All right, where was I? Many people are guilty of seeing only the perks of certain positions while conveniently overlooking the sacrifices and struggles that happen behind the scenes. People want to be the leader until a crisis arises. In those moments, we are content to sit back and second-guess the person in charge while breathing a sigh of relief that that's not us. It is easy to be frustrated when it seems like God is overlooking us while promoting others. But he knows what we can handle, and he loves us too much to give us everything we think we want when we want it. God knows whether we are ready for the pressure that will come at the next level of service. It is better to bloom where he has planted us than to be destroyed by being promoted too quickly. He knows when we are ready, and when the time is right, the door will open. In the meantime, let us serve the kingdom by serving others. God will call us, and we will experience success because we have trusted in his timing. Have you ever felt others were being given opportunities while you were overlooked? And did you gain a different perspective with time? Anybody? Sure. Sometimes, we want the promotion, and God says, "Nope, that's not for you." And we can be frustrated because I need that. And God's saying, "That's not what I have for you. I have something better. I have something different for you that I have for you." But we can get frustrated because we want, and we think we know best. And God's saying, "Nope, no, you don't. No, you don't. Hold on a minute. I have something different or better for you in time." One of the greatest illustrations of servanthood is found in John 13 of what we call the Last Supper. After sharing a meal with his 12 disciples, Jesus surprised them all by taking off his outer garment and wrapping a towel, the attire of a common household servant, around his waist. He began by pouring water into a basin, stooped down, and began to wash their feet. The disciples were shocked at this role reversal. Washing feet was considered a menial task, far beneath the dignity of an esteemed teacher like Jesus. Peter was especially indignant. You got to love Peter. Peter was so impetuous. He was so, he was the first one to speak. He was the first one to jump into the middle of anything. Some of us recognize a bit of him in us. Speak first and then think about what you're saying. Peter was especially indignant. "Thou shalt never wash my feet," he insisted in John 13:8. But Peter did not understand why Jesus was doing what he was doing. It was much more than just cleaning feet. Jesus was preparing to shed his blood on the cross for a spiritual cleansing that Peter and the rest of the disciples so desperately needed. When Jesus finished making his way around the table, he put on his outer robe and once again took his seat. And then he said, "Know ye what I have done unto you?" John did not record the disciples' reaction to Jesus' question. Perhaps their only response was a blank stare, shock evident in their eyes. Maybe they were already beginning to grasp the uncomfortable implications of Jesus' action. If he was willing to assume the role of the lowest household servant, what did that mean for them? How far should they be willing to stoop? Then Jesus broke the silence by answering his own question. "If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, so also ought ye to wash one another's feet." As they heard Jesus' words, perhaps James and John thought back to the earliest request to be seated at the Lord's right and left hand. Maybe they flushed with embarrassment, realizing how silly their ambitions must have seemed to Jesus. Or maybe the realization came after Jesus was resurrected from the dead and they had time to process everything that had happened. One thing was certain. The disciples eventually did grasp the message Jesus wanted to convey. They spent their lives serving others and established the church Jesus had envisioned. In both death and life, the disciples illustrated the words of the Apostle Paul in Philippians 2:5-7. "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who made himself of no reputation and took upon him the form of a servant." We don't frequently have a foot washing service. We've done it in the past. And I can remember having a couple tremendous moves of God in that. Why? Why did God move in such a way in that? Because we show that, I'm not the greatest. I'm just a servant. That's what Jesus called us to be, to serve, to minister, to care for people. In whatever capacity he has put us in, help us, Lord, that we will serve people, that we will lift them up, that we will strengthen, that we will seek to encourage, that there's a part of us that becomes part of us, that every thought we have is, Lord, how can I serve? How can I minister to this person? How can I show compassion to this person? Because that's what Jesus did. He went about seeking to lift up people, to help people, not to promote himself. He wasn't saying, look how great I am. That wasn't Jesus' way at all. He was a servant, and that's what he called us to do. Unfortunately for James and John, the other 10 disciples overheard their conversation with Jesus, and they were not happy. Interestingly, their response seemed to have been, I should have thought about asking Jesus for that. They wanted their resumes to be top of the stack. They were upset because they thought James and John beat them to the head of the line. Just as in Mark 9, Jesus once again turned the accepted leadership principles on their head. Whosoever will be great among you shall be your minister, he told them, and whosoever will be chiefest shall be servant of all. Jesus then used his own life as an example of the true kingdom service. The Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. And the question is asked, who can you serve today? Who can you serve today? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can make up our minds of how, of a way of serving people that we're going to do that in some way. I told you I worked with this lady, and she would walk into the building every day like she had lost her best friend. And for a while, they had me sitting at the front desk. So when she came in, she walked right past. And in fact, our company, we have a sign-in book. So when you come in, you have to mark that you're here for the day. And so she was literally stopping right here. And everybody that came in would say, hey, how you doing? Have a great day, whatever, except this lady. And I'm like, Lord, help me reach her. I don't know what's going on in her life. I don't know what difficulties she's had. But help me befriend this lady. So every day when she came in, I'd have a big smile for her and just, hey, it's good to see you. Hope you have a great day. And for the first it was probably a month or more, I didn't even get a grunt. I didn't get anything. It's okay. I just kept doing it. Day after day after day. And finally, I'd get yeah, uh-huh. And that's about it. And it took probably a year of doing it every single day to get a smile out of this lady. But when I felt like I'd truly reached this lady and that had somehow brightened her life, it's when I wasn't there one day and she came to my desk and said, hey, I just want to say good morning to you. Thank you, Lord. I finally managed to at least reach her in some capacity. No one else in the company, and the person that sat across the hallway from me came over and said, did she come over and speak to you? Because he didn't speak to anybody. Yeah. Sort of amazing, isn't it? They said, yes. Not to lift me up. But this lady acted like she had no friend in the world. No one cared about her. That's the way she acted. I don't know what her situation is. Still don't know. But I know one thing. I can befriend her. I can give her a smile and greet her every morning. And it doesn't cost me a thing. Except for about 2 seconds. Have a great day. And if she doesn't respond, that's okay. I'm still going to do it. Well, how difficult is it for me to do the same thing to the person at the restaurant, at the store, at wherever? Just to smile, just to greet them in some fashion, and let them know somebody recognizes there's a person there. That's what Jesus did. He had compassion on people, many times the one that nobody else wanted to associate with. Let's stand. We have a 5-minute break to worship time.